Khabib Nurmagomedov is a man whose legacy will not so easily be equaled. Though there have been quite a few Nurmagomedov relatives making waves in both the UFC and beyond, the fighter who seems to be tasked with filling his boots is his longtime friend and training partner, Islam Makhachev. And so far, it's starting to look like he's up to the task. Facing off against Charles Oliveira for the vacant lightweight title at UFC 280, it looks to be set to be 2022's defining matchup. And if he can get past Oliveira this Saturday, he'll be well on his way to forming a remarkable legacy of his own. This is the rise of Islam Makhachev. Born in Makhachev in 1991, Islam's early life saw him grow up in the remote village of Burshi, where he was never too far from getting involved in street fights during his youth. The locals in his village saw him as weak because of the fact that he had left the city of his birth. When he did return to Makhachev, he actually lived quite close to Khabib Nurmagomedov, and both of them began training in combat sambo from a young age. During their early years, they lived close by, trained at the same gym, attended the same school, and once they had conquered the world of sambo, each man began to devote his life to mixed martial arts. After turning pro in 2010, Makhachev's rise to the top of the lightweight division would end up being a pretty slow burn. When Khabib was champion, he warned us all about the next generation and how Islam would be the one to lead the charge when he was gone. After going 11-0 on the regional scene with 7 finishes, Makhachev made his first walk to the UFC octagon, arriving in the middle of Khabib's 2-year absence due to injury. His first fight in the promotion didn't get much media attention and was buried on the Fight Pass prelims, but those who were aware of his potential knew that this was a must-see. His opponent was no pushover either. While he was making his own UFC debut, he had amassed a 17-1-1 pro record and was riding a 14-fight win streak on the lower to mid levels. Makhachev, at 23, was still expected to have some excellent wrestling and grappling skills as a foundation, but in this fight, we got to see some clean striking from Islam. When the opportunities came, he would often find his way to the clinch or go for the takedown, but Makhachev definitely showed himself to be willing to trade on the feet as well. In the second round, Islam found his way to the back and confidently cinched in a rear naked choke to force the tap. It was a strong debut, but all of the positive momentum he had built up would unfortunately come crashing down the next time around. His second walk to the octagon came in October of 2015 and saw him take on the 34-fight veteran Adriano Martins, someone whose most notable moment during that time came against Donald Cerrone, where he was knocked out with a head kick the previous year. But sometimes, all it takes is one solid punch to ruin our expectations, and for Martins, a perfectly timed right hand caught Islam as he moved in, finishing the fight before the 2-minute mark. It was a very impressive win for Adriano Martins, and for the young Islam Makhachev, a true learning experience. Looking back on it, it was clear that he was a bit reckless during the fight, a mistake which cost him his perfect record. This was the first loss of his career, and of course, the only time he has been finished as a pro fighter. Over the next 7 years, he would never lose another fight. Rebounding from a brutal knockout can sometimes be difficult for a young prospect, and for Islam Makhachev, he decided that caution and patience were his best options moving forward. Back-to-back decision victories over Chris Wade and Nick Lentz did a good job at restoring our faith in his potential. The Wade fight was a good, solid win that wasn't too flashy or even too dominant. But shortly after, with his name firmly back in the win column, Makhachev put in a very strong showing against Nick Lentz, dominating the veteran over 3 rounds to score the unanimous decision. A year-long layoff would follow, and Islam was booked to take on a name that was all too familiar to Team Khabib. Gleison Tibau had given Khabib one of his toughest challenges during his initial rise, with his strong upper body strength and wrestling chops proving to be a difficult matchup for the Eagle's own skills. And although Makhachev was taking on an older version of Gleison Tibau, he still managed to put on an impressive performance, knocking him out in just 57 seconds. It was around this point that the hype train started to pick up some steam. It had been over 2 years since his loss to Adriano Martins, and Islam's next victory, a first-round armbar against Kajan Johnson, showcased a fighter who was entering his prime. Now 27 years old and closing in on the top 15 at lightweight, we started to notice that Islam was having some difficulty in securing fights. The higher-ranked fighters were obviously looking upwards and not beneath them in the rankings, so the notion of fighting an unranked talent like Islam Makhachev was just too risky for many of them. Arman Tsarukyan was next up for Makhachev, and while these days many people see him as the potential future of the division, at this point he was a 22-year-old debuting fighter who was expected to offer up very little in terms of a challenge. But against all odds, the fight turned out to be highly competitive. The level of wrestling on display here was pretty staggering. Sure, Makhachev had a clear edge, but his opponent was proving that he was well worth keeping an eye on. After this bout, Makhachev would then defeat Davy Ramos in a comfortable performance over 3 rounds. People were definitely on board with the hype train at this point in time, but Khabib was still considered to be the more popular attraction. Islam had only gotten 2 finishes in the 6 fights that led up to this point, but after an 18-month layoff due to various issues, the next chapter of Islam Makhachev's career is where we would start start to see him truly break into the upper levels at 155. After failing to put together a bout with Rafael dos Anjos on 2 occasions, Islam's next opponent would instead be Drew Dober, the hard-nosed veteran who had taken home 3 straight finishes, making this one of the biggest tests of his career. And once the fight got underway, Islam wasted no time in getting his opponent to the ground, controlling Dober for the majority of the fight while always looking for the finish. This appeared to be a Makhachev who was more dangerous and more willing to sacrifice control in favor of a potential finish. And in the 3rd round, he was able to secure a submission, an arm triangle that brought his pro record to 19-1 and his streak of victories to 7. After that, Makhachev got his first call to headline a fight night event with Thiago Moises as his opponent. And just like Dober before him, this fight was once again a dominant showing from Islam. We caught a glimpse of his improved striking skills, and he showcased a level of comfort there while outpointing Moises in rounds 1, 2, and 3 before then taking over in the 4th. He hadn't yet taken on a real top 10 challenger, but it was clear that Islam Makhachev was ready for a step up in competition. The UFC, for a 3rd time, attempted to set up the fight with Rafael dos Anjos, but unfortunately, it fell through again, with RDA pulling out due to injury. Thankfully, Dan Hooker agreed to step in on 1 month's notice to fight a guy that, quite frankly, not many wanted to face. During the fight, he had little to no issue in taking Hooker to the ground, quickly shooting for the legs, before then dominating him from there. Before the round had hit its halfway point, Makhachev was able to secure a Kimura, causing the referee to step in and stop the fight. It was by far the most notable name on Makhachev's resume, but again, the UFC had tried to set him up for bigger fights. In February of 2022, the UFC finally decided to give Islam the top 5 test he was ready for, signing a bout between him and Beneil Dariush, a very competent wrestler and grappler who was fresh off a dominant victory over the former interim champion Tony Ferguson. Unfortunately, bad luck would strip Makhachev of his opportunity to score a huge victory, this time due to an ankle injury sustained by Dariush. So instead of the elite ranking that his original opponent had, Makhachev would instead take on the unranked Bobby Green. Sure, it was admirable for Bobby Green to step up and take the fight, but it wasn't even remotely competitive. The two fought in a catchweight bout at 160 pounds, and Islam essentially ran through Bobby Green, completely shutting down his offense before finishing him less than 4 minutes in. And that brings us to the present day. Now sitting at a strong 22-1, Islam still hasn't faced off against a true member of the lightweight elite. But after scoring 10 straight wins inside the octagon, the numbers eventually proved to be too much for Dana to ignore, and so the fight with Charles Oliveira was set up. These are 2 of the best fighters in the sport today, and thankfully, we won't have to wait long to see how they match up. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.